talking about approaches to sociological research, the use of approaches drawing on different research methods. The use of approaches drawing on different research methods. What I was saying is the research methods that we've spoken about earlier, we have spoken about questionnaires, we have spoken about interviews, we have spoken about observation. All of them, they come under the heading of data collection techniques, right? Data collection techniques. Now, what we talk about right now, for instance, if we speak about case studies, a case study isn't really a data collection technique, right? सबसे पहली चीज़ case study होती क्या है? Why is it that we use the term case study in this context? When we use the term case study, we are actually referring to data being collected on a small group, right? When a small group is, it could be a single individual as well. When a small group or a single individual is studied in detail with the intention that the data collected over here would be used elsewhere, right, on a group that has similar characteristics than the group that you're collecting data from, right? So when we talk about a case study, what I'm trying to explain you over here is a case study is not an example of a data collection technique, right? You're not collecting data through a case study. In order to collect data, you need to use methods, either self-report methods, or they could be varying, there could be various tests, or you could use an observational method or any method at all, right? तो केस स्टडी होती क्या है? जब हम केस स्टडी की बात करते हैं तो एक छोटा ग्रुप, और इट कुड बी अ सिंगल इंडिविजुअल, व्हेन यू कंडक्टिंग अ डिटेल्ड रिसर्च ऑन देम, व्हेन यू कलेक्टिंग डेटा from that group in detail with the intentions of being able to use that data on a group that holds similar characteristics. ठीक है? तो to start off with case studies over here, this type of research studies the characteristics of particular group or case, such as Westwood's in 1984. This happened to be a 12-month participation observation study of female workers in a Stitchco factory. Now, like I said, this we calling this a case study because this was conducted by this person on these workers, right? So you're getting hold of a small group and you're conducting a detailed research on them, right? लेकिन data collection के लिए आपको कोई ना कोई data collection technique use करनी पड़ेगी, जैसे कि for in this case we have participant observation, right? Be very clear on this, be very clear on this, right? Moving on, a case study is not really a research method but rather a technique in which different methods can be used to generate data. Such studies are usually based on qualitative methods, and of course if they're based on qualitative methods, it wouldn't be wrong for us to assume that they have rich in-depth knowledge that can be gained on that particular group, right? Because it's a small group, you have all your time and effort and your resources can be allocated to data collection from that particular group only, right? Now moving on towards the strengths and the limitations of a case study. Number one, the focus on a single group studied over time provides great depth and detail of information that has greater validity than simple quantitative studies. I think that comes without saying. Of course, if you're collecting data merely through statistics, you wouldn't really have detailed information on you. You wouldn't really have detailed data on you. However, on the other hand, if you're conducting a study like the one that we were referring to by Westwood, if it is a participant observation method through which the data is being collected, there are more chances of you being able to come up with data that is more detailed, right? So moving on, does I hope everyone gets this first advantage over here. Because the focus is on a single group, there are chances of the data you collecting being more detailed, which can result in the validity of the research getting higher, right? In cases where the sample is relatively small and self-contained, such as a factory, Westwood, a school by Lacey, a gang, criminal gang, that is the study by Venkatesh that we keep on speaking about every now and then, large amount of data can be collected in a relatively cost effective manner. Though, do we all understand this?
Yes, sir.
And taking it a step further, if we're using data collection techniques like participant observation, There are, because you yourself, you're participating in the activities of the group that you're collecting data from, there are chances of you being able to uncover things, you being able to figure out things that you probably would not have been able to otherwise, right? And in a situation like this, you're probably able to uncover the meanings that people give to everyday behavior, right? Why is it that someone is behaving in this particular manner? For instance, I mean, you could even bring in the Weberian concept of Verstehen. And for the ones who do not remember what Verstehen is when you're, in a simple manner, when you're putting yourself in someone else's shoe to figure out why someone is the way they are, right? If someone is behaving in a particular manner, there has to be reason behind that, and this we are able to figure out usually by conducting researches through methods like a participant observation method, right? So I hope we get this third point over here as well. Such studies help to uncover the meaning that people give to everyday behavior. They often make use of participant observation, but other methods are also used in case studies. Small scale case studies can also be used as a pilot study. For the ones who do not remember what a pilot study is, a pilot study is a small scale study conducted before the actual study to check for feasibility, राइट? ये आप एक स्मॉल स्केल स्टडी कंडक्ट कर सकते हो एक्चुअल स्टडी से पहले, ये देखने के लिए कि जो रिसर्च आप कंडक्ट करना जा रहे हैं, क्या वो आपकी रिसर्च फीजिबल होगी भी या नहीं होगी, क्या जो मेथड आप यूज़ करना चाह रहे हैं टू बी एबल टू कलेक्ट डाटा, is that serving the purpose, is that data collection method actually helping you collect data the way you want to, right? So such studies help to uncover the meanings that people give to everyday behavior. They often make use of participant observation, but other methods are used in case studies as well. Small scale studies can also be used as a pilot study. I mean, there's a possibility you are choosing, like I said, it's a small scale study being conducted before an actual study. You're actually getting hold of a tiny little group, a small little group, you're collecting data from them with the intention that if this works, you'd step into something big and you'd try to cater the macro prospects of the research you want to conduct as well. Do we get this?
Yes,
Right? So, small scale case studies can also be used as pilot studies to allow a researcher to develop a hypothesis, right? Hypotheses, plural of hypothesis, test data collection methods, and identify potential problems in preparation for a larger study. Now, let's just say while conducting a tiny little case study, which is being conducted with the intentions of figuring out if things if this study design, if this design of the study is okay, there's a possibility you come across certain problems which you could rectify and work on so that the larger study that you want to conduct उसके अंदर वो सारे problems नहीं आते. We get this, right?
yes, sir.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Say 1, 2, 3, and 4. We've discussed 4 strengths over here. Moving on towards the limitations of a case study. There are a range of practical limitations. It's all highlighted over here. So there are a range of practical limitations that we have over here that depend on some extent to the size and scope of the study, right? What size are you trying to cater? What's the scope of the study that you're trying to step into? Large scale in-depth studies can take a lot of time. That's a practical limitation. You need to have enough of time, you need to have enough of resources could be in terms of money, feasibility, acceptance from the group that you want to conduct your research on, your time. Yeah, Venkatesh, he ended up spending 7+ years. That's a lot, that's quite a lot of time. Not everyone would be ready to invest that much of time, right? So large scale in-depth studies can take a lot of time, effort, and money. Regardless of the size, the intensive and detailed nature of case studies means that they make higher demands on the skills of researcher. You know, the longer you conducting this study, the more the skills of the research are being tested over here. The researcher
Yes,
needs
sir.
to be, the research team needs to be well equipped with the knowledge, the skills, the ways through which they need to collect data, by making a point that they do not end up being native, by making a point that if it's a covert observation, let's just say I'm making it up, if it's a covert observation, the participants shouldn't find out. Or if I get back to Venkatesh research was an overt one because the participants did know that their study was that data was being collected on them. In that case, participants making a point that the participants did not end up changing their behavior or start faking things. All of this has a lot to do with the skills of the researcher, and this indeed is a very demanding skill that a researcher needs to have. Right now, a researcher for who, like this says, who may spend months or years living and working with their subjects and respondents, who may be subject to extensive and detailed questioning and observation throughout the study. I mean, imagine the people Venkatesh was collecting data from, they could have been a pain, like literally. I mean, they could have asked, imagine the people would be curious. There's someone who's there with you, who's not amongst you, is there to collect data on you, and this can result in extensive questioning about the purpose, about the findings, about the interpretations, and a lot more. Does anyone have any questions so far?
Sir, the one thing that you said was interpretation, and what was before it? You said, I didn't get it.
I can explain you the
Ask my yaad.
you talk about.
Okay. Yeah, I think.
You want me to explain the interpretation part?
No, just if you can explain the fourth point again.
This one, subject to extensive and detailed questioning and observation through the study.
Yes.
Yeah. Now, throughout the study, when there's someone who is there, the people. Now, I gave an example of Venkatesh study over here, right? Venkatesh study, there were the people, they knew that a study was being conducted on them. Don't you think they must have questioned him? They must have been curious about what he's doing, how he's doing, what he's figured out so far. How does he intend to make use of the findings that he's received?
Yes, sir.
Are we sorted?
Yes, sir.
Right. Now, it is difficult to generalize from case studies because they tend to focus on small groups that may only be representative of themselves. That's another important thing. Case studies, for example, the three studies that we spoke about Westwood, the Stitchco company, that was a factory. We spoke about Lacey, we spoke about Venkatesh. At times the group that you're conducting a research on isn't really representative of the wider target population. Remember, I'm using the word target population over here, not the word population, right? तो ये भी तो पॉसिबिलिटी है कि जो ग्रुप आप कंडक्ट जिस ग्रुप के ऊपर से आप डाटा कलेक्ट करने जा रहे हैं, वो डाटा आपका या वो ग्रुप आपका रिप्रेजेंटेटिव ना हो. अगर आपका ग्रुप रिप्रेजेंटेटिव नहीं है आपके टारगेट पॉपुलेशन से का नहीं, अगर आपका ग्रुप रिप्रेजेंटेटिव नहीं है आपके टारगेट पॉपुलेशन का से, let's do it in English. If the group you're conducting, if the group that you've chosen to collect your sample from isn't really representative of your target population, in that case, the chances of your findings being generalizable to the target population would automatically come down. Do we get this?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. It might, however, be possible to draw comparisons between similar groups. Like I said, this is the first thing that we spoke about when we started off with case studies. I hope everyone gets this. Do we?
Yes, sir.
Right. Moving on, let's talk about social surveys. What exactly are social surveys? We typically use the term social surveys to when we talk about collecting data through questionnaires and interviews, right? uh, One particular type of survey is cross-sectional survey, which is explicitly designed to produce a snapshot of behavior at a given time. Now, in order for us to understand what a snapshot study is, we need to compare it with a longitudinal study, right? A longitudinal study, I mean, this is something we would study in the next half an hour or so, but what exactly is a longitudinal study over here? When you talk about a longitudinal study, a study that is conducted for a long period of time, provided there are developmental changes that are recorded. I'll just write it down. A study conducted for a long period of time, and there are developmental changes recorded there as well, right? Acha. Up this term, long period of time, this is a pretty subjective term, right? There are many people who would be like, oh, 6 months is long enough, and there'd be others who would be like, no, I think 6 years. I mean, this is a pretty subjective term. So we need to keep in mind when we talk about a longitudinal study, this is something that majority of people they miss on, which they shouldn't. This happens in sociology and psychology both. When you talk about a longitudinal study, it has to do with the developmental changes that you're trying to record as well. So as we know, I'm assuming we now understand what a longitudinal study is. The opposite of a longitudinal study is a snapshot study, a study that gives you an idea about the behavior at a particular time, right? For instance, if you're talking about collecting data through a single questionnaire or by merely interviewing someone once, it is just giving you an idea about what that particular person feels about that particular event, issue, situation as you speak to them, not beyond. So, one particular type of survey is the cross sectional survey, which is explicitly designed to produce a snapshot of behavior at any given time. Qualitative forms of cross sectional surveys are generally descriptive, with the aim being to illustrate a particular type of behavior it may involve. For example, looking at a certain population characteristics such as suicide, income, or poverty. I mean, I don't know if you do know this. We can bring in the study that was conducted by Durkheim, the very popular study that Durkheim conducted that had to do with the relationship between suicide rates and their characteristics of people in general, right? So, looking at a certain population characteristics such as suicide, income, poverty applied to a single country, a large area within a country, or a specific feature of different countries. Now, we just spoke about how qualitative aspects can be looked into. Now that no one has any questions, let's move on, take this ahead. Quantitative forms now, right? Now we talking about social surveys. We spoke about social surveys over here. We spoke about how you could have qualitative data gathered, and now we move on discussing how they could be quantitative data being gathered, right? Okay, now if you have data, if you have quantitative data, the more common type are analytic. The aim is to analyze both correlations and causations. I'm assuming everyone knows what the difference is between correlations and causations. Correlations is when two things happen to be at the same time. Causation is one causing another, right? So just because two things happen to occur at the same time, you could say they're correlated, but you cannot really be certain if one is causing another, right? तो आप ये कह सकते हो कि इनके बीच में कोई रिलेशन है, कोरिलेशन है, लेकिन ये दोनों, I mean, there's no causal factor attributed over here. So the aim and this comes without saying, आप दो चीज़ों को relate तब कर पा रहे होते हो जब आपके पास quantitative data होता है, and quantitative data happens to be essential when it comes to figuring out correlations, okay? And correlations at times lead to causations, but not necessarily. Let me say that again. Correlations at times do lead to causations, but this isn't essential. This isn't a must. Durkheim's study of suicide, for example, used cross-sectional surveys taken from different societies to build up a comparative analysis of variable suicide rates. This is what I was talking about, right? What Durkheim did was he was trying to figure out. Okay, let me give you guys a quick little background on Durkheim's study. He wanted, since, okay, remember, Durkheim is a functionist. Functionists are all structuralists, and all structuralists believe it's the structure of society that shape human behavior, right? Durkheim is a
Yes,
functionist.
sir.
Yeah.
All functionists are structuralists, and structuralists believe it is the structures of society that shape human behavior. In that case, the general idea that I want to give you all, a basic little idea that I want to give you all over here is, according to Durkheim, instead of naming and blaming individuals for the suicide attempts or suicides, let's try to have a look at societal factors. Societal, ये वाला societal, ठीक है जी, राइट? अकॉर्डिंग टू डर्कहाइम हम सोसाइटल फैक्टर्स से देखते हैं कि क्या आपका इनकम, क्या आपका मैरिटल स्टेटस, क्या आपका अनएम्प्लॉयमेंट, क्या आपका रिलीजन आपकी सुसाइड रेट को अफेक्ट करता है या नहीं करता, राइट? फॉर इंस्टेंस, अगर अगर हम डाटा कलेक्ट करते हैं और डाटा कलेक्ट करने के बाद हमें पता चलता है कि अनएम्प्लॉयड लोगों के अंदर सुसाइड के चांसेस ज़्यादा हैं एज़ कम्पेयर टू एम्प्लॉयड द पीपल हु एम्प्लॉयड, राइट? तो वी कैन that forces us to believe that there might be a correlation between unemployment, employment, or suicide. Get it?
Yes, sir.
Right.
Yes, sir.
In that
Yes, sir. Yes.
in that case, if it is unemployment that is linked to or correlated in this case to suicide, why blame the individual? Right? Though Durkheim's study of suicide, for example, used cross-sectional surveys taken from different societies to build up a comparative analysis of variable suicide rates. He used these as the basis for a theoretical explanation of different types of suicides. So again, we're talking about how what do you call it? Social surveys could play an important role when it comes to what do you call it? When it comes to having a cross-cultural comparison or cross-sectional collecting data through cross-sectional dimensions. Okay, so both type of cross-sectional survey, now when you talk about both type, we're talking about the quantitative and the qualitative sort. They normally require a representative sample because one of the main goals is to make generalizations about behavior. Cross-sectional surveys tend to focus on identify groups that share broad similarities such as income, education, and gender. They measure differences using a single variable. Keep this in mind. By comparing standardized group, it is possible to explain differences in death or suicide rates using variations in standardized variables. Whether, for example, people with a high level of education have high rates of suicide than those with a low level of education. अब हम क्या कर रहे हैं, हम बाकी जितने भी वेरिएबल्स हैं उन सबको हम कांस्टेंट रख के ये फिगर आउट करने की कोशिश कर रहे हैं कि क्या इस वेरिएबल को चेंज करने से हमारे पास कोई इम्पैक्ट आ रहा है या नहीं आ रहा, राइट? लेट्स जस्ट से आई एम जस्ट मेकिंग दिस अप अगेन based on Durkheim study, ठीक है? If I am comparing individuals from different groups who have the same income, who have the same educational background, are from the same gender, however, their religion, let's just say if I'm talking about Protestants over here and comparing them with Catholics, आपके पास difference सिर्फ और सिर्फ religion की basis पे. Remember, I made a point that all the other variables were similar, and if there was any difference, it was only in terms of religion. This is when I can talk about a relationship being found between these variables. अगर रिलीजन के अलावा बाकी फैक्टर्स भी अलग अलग होंगे तो आई कांट रियली टेल कि ये इम्पैक्ट रिलीजन की वजह से हो रहा है या किसी और फैक्टर की वजह से हो रहा है. आई होप यू ऑल गेट दिस.
Yes, sir.
डू वी गेट दिस?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
To start off with what ethnography is, you know, since you've all read this, and when we talk about ethnography and anthropology, also known as social anthropology, both of them they deal with cultures, ठीक है? अब ethnography has more to do with or you could say anthropology के अंदर ethnography आता है. I'm saying, where is it? Yeah, anthropology के अंदर ethnography आता है, ठीक है जी? अब when you're doing field work, I'm sticking to your book here. You have an amazing camera, you're taking photographs, you are taking notes, you're making videos, you're meeting people, you are collecting data through interviews, you have this very fancy safari suit worn, and you're probably shooting for National Geography, ठीक है? ये हम सब चीज़ें मैं कह रहा हूँ एथनोग्राफी से रिलेटेड, ठीक है? द फर्स्ट थिंग दे बोथ हैव टू डू विद कल्चर्स. द सेकंड थिंग, एथनोग्राफी का एक सब पार्ट, सॉरी एंथ्रोपोलॉजी का एक सब पार्ट हम एथनोग्राफी को कंसिडर कर रहे हैं, ठीक है? जब आप इन सारी चीज़ें और बियॉन्ड के थ्रू डाटा कलेक्ट कर रहे होते हैं, ठीक है? नाउ व्हेन वी टॉक अबाउट going, meeting people, collecting information from them, taking notes, taking pictures, making videos, shooting, that all of that comes under the heading of ethnography. And you could actually use a range of methods to collect data, right? It could be quantitative, qualitative, unstructured interviews, so on and so forth. However, when you're putting when you're applying ethnography, now that you've collected data, you are trying to put that to use, or you trying to apply whatever information that you've gathered. All of that would come under the heading of ethnography, right? So a sub part of ethnography, what no, a sub part of anthropology is ethnography. Ethnography is field work, लेकिन उसका bigger picture देखें तो हम we study all of that under the heading of anthropology. Now, after that, after you've collected all the information through an ethnographic research, you could actually generalize or come up with findings. You could say, oh, I studied this particular group from this place, and this is what I found out about the culture, right? अब एक anthropology रिलेटेड रिसर्च के कंक्लूजन पे आते हो, यूजुअली थ्रू एन एथनोग्राफिक रिसर्च. डू वी गेट दिस?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
डू वी गेट इट?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So just keep this safari
Yes, sir.
in your mind. You went there, you collected information through a range of methods. Now that you've done all of that, you're applying that, you're putting that to use, and eventually अगर उसका हम wider horizon से उसको देखते हैं तो वो आपकी that all of that comes under the heading of social anthropology. Are we sorted?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Ethnography, also known as field work, is a way of researching which tries to achieve a detailed, in depth understanding of a group of people or of a social situation. It began in anthropology, the study of different cultures. Both of them, they have to do with cultures. When researchers took part in the daily lives of people, often in traditional and pre modern societies. ठीक है? When researchers they took part in the daily life of people, often in traditional and pre-modern societies, in an attempt to understand their view of the world. Get it? In sociology, it is strongly associated with participant observation, whether overt or covert, but ethnographers may also use a range of other methods, such as collecting data through such as collecting data through unstructured interviews, qualitative documents, quantitative data, so on and so forth, right? Do we all understand this?
Yes, sir.
Right. Moving on, let's speak about a longitudinal study. I'm assuming everyone does remember what I had said a few minutes back when I talk about a longitudinal study. A longitudinal study has to do with a study that has been conducted for a long period of time, provided you're trying to record developmental changes, right? Now, taking this a step ahead, there are an opposite of a longitudinal study is a snapshot research or a snapshot study. ठीक है? तो yeah, वो नहीं कहते this application that you use, what do you call it, Snapchat, right? There are people who'd go out to eat, they'd click a picture to show the world what they're eating, as if the world is, I mean, let me not say much, but yeah, you're giving an idea, giving people an idea about what you're doing right now. Do we get this?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Now, these are a form of comparative analysis that involves tracking changes, right? We're talking about tracking changes, remember, developmental changes, right, amongst a representative sample over time from a few months to many years. The same group is analyzed at different stages in their lives using methods ranging from questionnaires to non-participant observation. Okay, one more thing that I like clarifying over here. लॉन्गिट्यूडल स्टडी का ये मतलब नहीं होता कि आप जाके वेंकटेश की तरह वहाँ जाके रह लें, मतलब अपना बोरिया बिस्तरा लेके चले जाएं, इसका ये मतलब नहीं है, राइट? यू कुड बी कलेक्टिंग इंफॉर्मेशन पीरियोडिकली. आई मीन लेट्स जस्ट से इट्स डिसाइडेड शुरू से कि आप हर 6 महीने के बाद जाएंगे, इंटरव्यू करेंगे उनको, राइट? एंड यू डिसाइडेड यू बी कलेक्टिंग डाटा फॉर द नेक्स्ट 10 years. So in 10 years, if you're meeting your participants after every 6 months, that makes 20 visits in total. You don't have to go and live with them, stay with them, ठीक है? तो आप डेटा को इंटरवल्स पे या वेव्स, जो वेव्स का टर्म लिखा हुआ है, या यू could use the term periodically आप डेटा कलेक्ट करते हो. Longitudinal surveys are carried out at intervals. Oh, I've written it, it's written over here already. Are carried out at intervals referred to as waves over a significant period of time. They can last for many years. The researcher remains removed from the study group, having contact with the research subjects only on a limited basis at set intervals. Like for instance, I could say after every 6 months, 10 years. It's amazing how we teachers use exactly the same examples now. I just realized I have this written over here. Let's just say if there's a study that, and it's decided that January the 10th you'd collect data, and then January, February, March, April, May, June, and then June the 10th you'd collect data. That's an example of periodic data collection. Does anyone have any question?
No, sir.
Yeah. Moving on,
No, sir.
if we speak about the strengths and limitations of a longitudinal survey, number one, strengths of a longitudinal survey. Longitudinal surveys allow the researcher to identify and track personal and social changes over long periods, revealing trends that would otherwise remain hidden, right? For instance, how was life like back in the 1970s compared to how is life like now in the 2020s? Get it? You could track personal changes, you could track social changes. This can help you reveal trends, make predictions about the future. A further advantage of longitudinal surveys that they're usually based on a large representative sample. Usually, right? Remember, we're studying sociology. I wouldn't want anyone to come up to me saying, but you said this. Remember, I use the word usually over here, not necessarily, right? Though, a further advantage of longitudinal surveys is that they're usually based on large representative samples and so can be used to suggest correlations and causal relationships. Get it? Correlations and causations is the word.
Yes, sir.
Number two, if we move on and we speak about the limitations, the most important one is sample attrition. The drop off rate is usually very high, right? See, there's an arrow here, right? The drop off rate is very high. Let's just say initially you had around 100 people whom you decided to continue collecting data on for the next 10 years, and by the ninth year you realize you're left with 20 only and the rest 80. Some died, others backed off, some migrated. Get it? Now, sample attrition is, we're talking about the limitations of a longitudinal study. Sample attrition, or the number of people who drop off or drop out from the original sample over time, is a major limitation of these surveys. People drop out of the research for a range of reasons. They may lose interest, they move out without leaving contact details, or they may die. Yeah. High levels of attrition can reduce the representativeness of the sample. Now, imagine there's this researcher who has very carefully selected a sample of 100 people. Out of those 100 people, if 80 of them just vanish, or not even 80, 50 of them vanish, don't you think your eventual findings might not be generalizable, right? तो a
Yes,
problem
sir.
that goes the longer the study lasts, right? पहले साल आपके पास 100 लोग थे, दूसरे साल 97 रह गए, तीसरे साल 87 रह गए, चौथे साल 62 रह गए, and ta 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 ta. While longitudinal studies can identify trends or allow researchers to make correlations and causal connections between phenomena such as income and life expectancy, only ever a quick look at the behavior at any given moment. Now, one more thing, you know what, now the example that I was giving a couple of minutes back was, what if we're talking about how life was back in the 1970s, right? You meet Mr. X and the first question you ask is, let's just say you're talking about conducting a study on individuals who graduated from Harvard, right? I'm just making it up. You meet Mr. X who's graduated from Harvard and in the 1950s, and you ask him, hey, how's life? एंड ही सेज इट्स अमेजिंग, देयर इज अ पॉसिबिलिटी कि जिस दिन आपने उनसे क्वेश्चन पूछा उससे 2 दिन पहले उस बंदे को प्रमोशन मिला है, उससे 2 दिन पहले उसकी ड्रीम जॉब मिल गई है, ठीक है? एंड लेट्स से इफ यू मीट दैट पर्सन after 2 years, and that would happen to be a 1 2 3 4, that would be a fourth meeting. You ask that person how life is like, and he might not be happy with life. There's a possibility that his spouse or her spouse passed away. No, since it was mixed race. So yeah, his spouse passed away. In that case, I mean, despite of the fact that you're collecting data over a long period of time, but at the particular time when you, or the particular interval when you're actually collecting data, उस particular time पे how that particular person would feel would reflect in the answers you get from that person. Do we get this?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Only ever a quick look at behavior at any given moment. They can therefore be criticized for lacking depth and validity. And I think that's pretty self explanatory. Now, I'm hoping everyone did understand this. This was on page number 65. This brings this tiny little topic to an end. And it was this that we started off with approaches to sociological research. We spoke about the use of approaches drawing on different research methods, including case studies, social surveys, ethnography, and longitudinal studies. Does anyone have any question? In that case, if there's no question, I'd like to wrap this up. Take care of yourself, stay happy, healthy, safe, and protected. Stay humble, spread positivity, spread smiles, and Allah Hafiz.
Yeah, sir.
Allah Hafiz.
Allah Hafiz.
Allah Hafiz.